So first change in the definition of eligible weather condition for the fire events. I wasn't able to get in contact with anybody from FPR, but I looked at the statute. And forest fire or wildfire is used in statute. So I just use both terms. So there are, you all probably are well aware, like in the spring after the thaw, there are wildfire events. They're not forest fire events. And so I thought it might be prudent to include both.
The wildfire meaning like the debris and the floor,
Yeah.
or in an open area.
Or in a meadow, pasture, etc. So moving on, in the security special fund.
Like just one quick thing on wildfires. Like I know in Tunbridge, there was a really bad one we had about 10 years ago where, somebody it was this season, they were, burning something and it got way out of control on 5 acres or something. That if that happened to destroy someone's crop, say, sugar bush, whatever it would be, would a human started wildfire be considered a weather event?
I think it is, because even though the spark was from a human, the conditions are what caused the spread.
Dryness,
dry, the debris, the wind, etc. So in the fund language, there was that question about whether it's an LLC or an individual or corporation. But I tried to address that by saying to persons owning farms and forest operations, as the default definition of persons means any corporate form from the individual to any business organization that you can think of. And then for the maximum annual award, you had asked that it be limited at 150,000. So it's still a maximum annual award of 5% of the undesignated and unreserved funds in the fund, provided that the award shall not exceed 150,000 per qualified applicant farm or forestry operation per year. So that's the max that they would get. So even if the 5% was 300,000, they would not get 300,000. They would only get 150,000.
Is that fiscal year state accounting, or is that, a farm or forest operation year of the calendar year?
This is about what's in the fund. So it is the fiscal year.
State fiscal year. Okay.
From there, line 11 on page 5, change the term grant to payment, which was missed in the prior draft. And on page 6, in the year-end report, it was noted that it should be a year-end report of farm or forestry operation income and expenses. And then you moved away from the quarterly awards and rolling over the quarter and went back to the original application language. An application may be made at any time, and the secretary may only close the application process upon award of all appropriated funds for the relevant fiscal year. So the board will then have, as you were all noting, some discretion on how they allocate that money through the year. Moving down again on page 6, line 20, changing the word grant to payment. And page 7, line 11, adding the Commissioner of Forest, Parks and Recreation or designee to the membership of the Security Special Fund Review Board, adding to forestry operators. And that's highlighted because they previously were 2 forestry operators who had received relief funding, but because there probably aren't any that have received relief funding, you asked that that be removed. And then with regard to conflict of interest, using the definition of conflict of interest under the state ethics code, and then giving the secretary discretion to appoint an alternate member to maintain a quorum of the board. And that, I believe, oh no, then in the retitling, replacing the word grant with payments.
And I think even adding the retitling, or maybe you had added that yesterday.
That was there yesterday, but it had said to provide grants. Since it's no longer grants, I changed it to pay.
Okay, good.
And then back up to the modifier based on net farm income. I know NOFA has always been reluctant, if not opposed to that. But that was something that Senator Hardy wanted in her draft. But you don't need it. You're creating this program and its criteria. You don't need to include it.
So we're on page 5.
Line 3 through 5.
1 through 5. So section 2, secretary shall establish criteria based on the annual net income of the farm or forestry operation in relation to the median net income.
Should say farms or forestry operation.
There were, I think, 2 things that came out of that conversation yesterday. The first was that we don't know what the median net income is of all farms in Vermont. We hadn't even talked about the forestry operation piece there, so that adds another wrinkle. But then second, even if we did know, or if we could establish what the median income was, whether we wanted to be including some criterion like this. So that was, and the testimony we heard, I think, from, for representing the coalition, was that they didn't feel that that was the direction they wanted to go. So that's, I think, where we were. Representative Burt?
I think I have similar feelings to NOFA on that one, in terms of that there shouldn't be a criteria based on income. I think that complicates the situation. And I just feel like it's, I can in my mind think of nuanced situations where if the goal is to provide maybe a little more equity, I'm guessing, is that what that is for?
Well, I don't know if that was the intent.
So the intent was that so a very profitable farm could have losses
I think it's for
that could absorb them, whereas a farm who lost all of their crops and it was their only crop and it was the basis for what their planned profit was going to be. Should there be some modifier for that profitable farm? Some way to enhance the grant amount in comparison to the farm that really lost it all, as opposed to the farm that could have absorbed those losses. And that's what Senator Hardy was looking for. It wouldn't prevent the profitable farm from being awarded. It would be a modifier. So say the net income for all farms is 50, but the profitable farm's income is 75. You turn that into a 1.15 modifier, which will somehow, or not 1, it'll be 0.75 modifier, which will reduce their amount, but they'll still receive an award.
Representative Bosland, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to ask what was the motivation of wanting to keep it in, which you just answered while I was thinking about the question. But I mean, I guess I'm just wondering if there isn't a way that we could address the issue of big farms and small farms and make sure that's considered in the mix. Other than this, like, this seems really awkward. I mean, and if you think about a big farm, that has a big loss, but they still have some profit, but they also have 40 employees, they might need that $150,000 more than somebody who loses half of their income on a smaller farm. You know, so I don't know how else we could measure that.
But it's not big farm, small farm, it's income ratio. It's profitability versus lack of profit. And I think one of the key points that the chair made is you don't know what net farm income is. And is that fair to apply across all ranges of farm? That's where small farm, medium farm, large farm, I think is relevant, because the net farm income of all average farms isn't going to be equitable for a small farm versus a large farm.
Right. Well, that's the thing. So if you have a family farm, but it's really successful and it has lots of employees, they're going to earn more money than a smaller farm, but they also have to pay all those employees. And so,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I don't love this version, but I don't know if there's another way that we could frame it to address the same issue or not.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. We want profitable farm. I think we're talking like, I think did we establish the criteria? Did we modify things so that the business has to be, I know we had a discussion on this,
Yeah.
that the farm itself had to be located in Vermont. I know we talked about farms that run the New Hampshire Vermont border that had some land in Vermont, but the dairy farms in New Hampshire. Have we done anything to address that?
The farm has to be, the applicant needs to be, have the farm or forestry operation needs to be from Vermont. But that doesn't mean that they can't own land elsewhere.
Right.
The agency might take into account their income from those parcels outside the state. But it doesn't, they're not prevented.
I think, we want to help make sure that farms that are profitable in Vermont stay profitable as well. So I don't see any harm being done to a ward based, not, based on, basically on crop loss versus whether or not a farm is successful. I think,
So you'd be.
that's getting into the realm of where we're, if we, not that this program would necessarily do that, but if we're having the same philosophical discussion that we had yesterday of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, then you also have the, that also on the flip side would say that we don't want to award unprofitable farms. We, if anything, we want to make sure that profitable farms stay profitable. Right? If we want to have a threat, and if you're not profitable, at some point, you're just not going to be in business. And there might be other factors beside weather that's creating that. It might be just not good bookkeeping, or, there are other factors. So to put that into it, to me, is starting to stretch things.
So you would be supportive of deleting that section 2 language and not having a modifier. Mike, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock and mindful that you said you needed to be somewhere else. I don't want to keep you if you need to go. We can keep talking about it. Good job.
Yeah, just quickly, Mike.
But Mike, can you come back this afternoon?
Probably
We
not.
may have a short floor time and could,
I'm on the Senate floor with the Ag Water Quality Bill. And then I am in House Environment, and then I am in House Judiciary.
okay, we'll see whether we can, if we need you, negotiate with them to release you for a short time.
Okay.
Did you want?
Yeah, just as you walk out the door, Mike, so to be eligible for these awards as a farmer, you have to be farming under the reps, right?
Right.
What's the parallel equipment than a sports operator?
We say subject to the AMPs.
Does that, like, how small can you be then? Can a farmer with a sugar bush be following AMPs?
They're supposed to.
They just say be subject to it.
Subject to it, right? Okay, I get it.
All right. Thank
You might.
So,
How are you?
anybody's welcome to come in if they want, but we're continuing we're gonna move into committee discussion, I guess. But, other thoughts on that, the intent or anything related to that language, how do other people feel about it?
You're looking for a comment?
I'm looking for, yeah, if you have one.
I do, and it's a possible injection of humor. Profitable farms and forestry operations are almost an oxymoron. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, yeah.
Excessively.
Is that a pesticide?
I mean, profitable.
Does anybody feel strongly that we ought to leave that language or leave or include some language that distinguishes between or directs the agency to establish, criteria? Anybody feel strongly about keeping that?
Well, wasn't one of the concerns that we don't have a number for that median farm number? If you don't have that, then maybe if we're gonna keep it, we need to direct them to figure out what that looks like. And how do you do that? Like, are they gonna add up all the 6,500 farms, including the ones that sell $2,000 worth of rhubarb in June? You know, I mean, I don't know if that's reasonable.
Yeah.
So if it's not a feasible thing to enforce, then I feel like we need to come, if we want to address the issue at all, we need to phrase it differently. And otherwise, maybe it needs to go. I mean, and I also it says something about in terms of establishing criteria, it could be in terms of considering various factors. It's useful to have income reports or something. And, so maybe you include that in the mix and then like you report what the level of damage is that you had. And if you think that you lost half your crop and your annual income is $40,000, well, you're probably gonna go under. And, somebody else, maybe the numbers are helpful, but I feel like the way it's phrased right now, it doesn't tell you enough. It just gives you a number that isn't useful. And also the second one is hard to measure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the language is also just, it doesn't even suggest, it says establish criteria. And it doesn't really reflect what we just heard the intent was.
Right.
So, I mean, it could be, you could establish criteria going the other direction.
Right.
Yeah. The lower your income was, the smaller your grant would be.
Yeah.
I don't think it's wise as a government to favor unprofitable businesses. That would essentially, we want to, I think, treat them all equally so that profitable businesses are also supported at the same time. So I like a Pete's Greens, if a Pete's Greens gets flooded, like the nature of that, you can tell by the nature of it, you wouldn't take $150,000 and say, ooh, I can, put that into my second home, they're going to take that and make a more stable business that is going to continue to employ people for a long time. That's a good thing. So why to build something?
Right, and why should their multiplier be less than the rhubarb farmer?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's it should be our concern, whether in relation to this, whether or not a farm is profitable or not profitable. That's not the point of this bill. It's to help when there's some kind of disaster. So I see that has an relation. So it should.
Right.
We also, we heard from the farmers themselves that they would not like to have this. So it's not as though they're asking for it.
With regard to expediency, it's one less thing to have to calculate. Every little bit
Yes.
that we add into it, that they have another hoop that has to be jumped through, the slower it's gonna be.
And our number one concern should be expediency.
I do have another point, not related to that one, but with this bill that I'd like to I think now would be a good time, or if you think.
Okay, yeah, so I'll just, before we move to that, then say that, well, I'll ask Mike to delete that language for the next draft. What is did you want to bring up?
I got to thinking about, just the sheer number of farms that are down to the size of a couple $1,000s worth of product in our state. For instance, just to give an example, I can't remember his name, but the gentleman from Hardwick that came and testified about his farm that washed, like so much of it just washed away from one river. Yeah. I know exactly where that is. I drive by it all the time. It's right on the east side of Hardwick. And it's not a significant amount of acreage. So not to say, in terms of just sheer number of acres, obviously his farm is significant. And there are many of those. And that's the point I'm trying to make is how have we looked into the potential number of applicants that could flood in a year like we had in 2023 and 2024 flooding? Could this just program potentially be inundated? Now, that is why we want to develop this program. I understand that, but I think there might be merit to, and I forget his name, Jed, but the man that gave testimony yesterday that represents the forest products. Dorn, yes. Mr. Dorn, he mentioned that they are in favor of having a disaster declaration involved in the process. I'm wondering if there's merit to that so that this program is not overwhelmed. Because if it's little isolated, localized events throughout the year, that in and of itself, with the sheer number of small farms we have, could really complicate things. And that declaration does not have to, it could come from either, whether it's the governor or even the board itself. And it could be, it could be localized, but it has to be a declaration before the applications are even looked at. Otherwise, they have applications coming in all the time that they would be required to look at. I'm just wondering, do we have any sense of, these folks are, I'm guessing they're probably not going to be paid a whole lot to review these applications and to just to make sure that this doesn't become a program that's burdening.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think we may already have language that does require a declaration. And it could be by the board itself, I think. While I'm looking, if you want to
I
chime
was
in.
just gonna comment, should it be a town or a county or a region or the whole state declaration? Or what should it be?
I think we were hearing yesterday in testimony that county is a possibility, but even within a county, you can have, but if it's a substantial enough storm within a county, then you could declare a disaster in that county, and it might have only affected half the county.
And 2024 was really, we saw very local, very intense events that may have hit Lindenville, St. J, Danville, Beecham. And they were local. They were not countywide. There's different watersheds and different, extreme rain in a 2-hour period made all the difference, negative impacting very local areas.
Who's going to be the authority that makes the decision?
Yeah, all I'm saying is that it could streamline the process a bit in terms of, I think, making sure that those who need help get it quickly. If we make sure that there's a process in place for triggering even reviewing applications. If the application, I don't know, I don't know how if there isn't a trigger for even reviewing applications to begin with, then
Yeah,
are they just gonna, is there potential to be inundated with applications that
I
don't
think,
qualify or that, you know, that
I
they
think
should have to
papers,
review?
I'm not seeing it, so we should check with Mike O'Grady, and maybe it was in 229, but I agree. And I thought that that the language here allowed for that or required that for the very reason that you're suggesting, so that it couldn't just be somebody saying, you know, I had a heavy rain at my house, but there would need to be a determination, but not a federal determination necessarily, but could be done through the board even.
I mean, like, for instance, last year I had like 3 acres of sweet corn that just got flattened
Hmm.
by heavy rain and wind. Within, you know, it was like about a half hour that it took to flat for 3 acres. Could be that only hit me, you know?
Is that what they call a microburst?
Yeah, I think that's gonna be fairly common, so I mean, maybe we leave it up to them to decide, but I'm just kind of curious as to how this is all play out.
So we'll follow up on that. And then before we wrap up here, I was going to ask whether if we have a relatively short floor, whether the committee is able to come back. Now, if Mike isn't here, then I don't know that we'll need to meet for too long. But the other outstanding questions that we needed to resolve, at least 2 of them, were the question of whether the program ought to be opt-in or not. And I know we had, you know, some good discussion about that, but maybe still some disagreement on that. And then essentially who would be eligible and how eligibility would be determined for logging contractors for the forestry operations side. We've heard a couple of different approaches there. I had suggested yesterday that we try and do some work outside of committee to bring in some proposals. So I'll follow up with anybody who's interested in thinking about that. We can have that conversation. So there's those 2, maybe 3 things. Is there anything else that people were feeling, oh, we didn't get to this?
I was always concerned about the money aspect and a few ideas.
Oh, yes, there's the revenue question. Thank you. Yeah.
I think that's worth discussing. If we could come up with something, because if we just handed it off, there isn't going to be enough money in the general fund to have. So this is quite worthless.
Yeah.
If we could come up with a dedicated amount of, that's why I mentioned yesterday, the nickel that's not turned, the bottle that's not turned in, that nickel goes to the water. If we could come up with something like that, that would come to us.
Yeah. Okay.
And I can say some more about that if we have a longer discussion. I spent a bunch of time with Ways and Means in there. There's concern about how likely it would actually stay dedicated. Like, we can ask it be dedicated, but that doesn't mean it stays that way. But I think if we raise more money, and then hopefully there's consideration for the host ask.
I think that's the legitimate concern and always a concern. I would like to think that if we had a dedicated fund that was going to help farmers, that it would be politically difficult perhaps to try and divert it away from farmers. All right. Anything else? Okay. Why don't we so our next agenda item is to hear from the Forest Products Association. I think we have folks waiting outside.
Okay.
So why don't we go off live? We'll open the door, let them in, let them get comfortable, and then